everyone. Welcome to At Home with Sally. I'm Sally Clarkson, and I have the biggest privilege in the world to be with so many friends from all over the world who join me every week to listen to my stories, inspiration, biblical encouragement, and I am just so glad that you're here today. Thanks so much for joining me. Hello, friends. Welcome to At Home with Sally. I'm so honored that you would take time to be here with me today. As the beginning of the new year is upon all of us, I have been talking in my membership and also in a couple of podcasts in the past week or two about this is a good time to renew your goals, to think through what is ahead, to declutter your soul, get rid of all that is creating excess baggage there that doesn't need to be there. And also, I've been talking a lot about what it means to really make the kinds of goals that serve not just your mind or your activities, but what really help to see that you're growing in wisdom, stature, favor with God, favor with man, your personality, your life story, your happiness, your relationships, because we are holistic people. And of course, the education of our children and the training of our children must also include well-rounded development ideals for them so that they might emerge from our homes in a holistic way. And many of you have told me that you really liked it when I did the 24 Family Ways because it gave you ways forward in your own lives and in knowing how to train your children. Well, as you know, I have 4 adult children. I can't possibly be this old, but Sarah is 37 and Joel is 35 and Nathan is 32 and Joy is 26. So all my children are grown and out in the world. And by God's grace, we still love one another. Have I been through all sorts of ups and downs and trials? Have they been through doubts? Have they had challenges in their lives? Of course, because we live in a broken and a fallen world. And some of their struggles I tell you about, and some I don't, because I believe that my family needs privacy in what they do. But in general, my children have kind of worked through many things and come out to a place where they all care deeply about their walk with God. They care deeply about having an impact on the world and by bringing light and beauty and goodness to it. And they still love one another and love us. So people will say to me, how did you do that? What were the 10 things you did? And so actually, I did write a book a while back. At first it was called 10 Gifts of Wisdom, and we changed the title to 10 Gifts of Heart because we might do wisdom down the line. What your child needs to take to heart before leaving home. And what I found is that a lot of times, as we are training and cultivating our children's heart, soul, mind, we are oriented to the educational goals that maybe university entrance exams require, or university entrance papers require, or to prepare them for a specific job. But as you know, as an adult, most of your life is about what you are like inside, your integrity, the strength of character you have to go through hard times, the ability to be steadfast, the way that you relate to people and have learned how to love people, and so on and so forth. So I wrote this book a number of years ago because all of my children at that point had graduated from high school and had gone into the world. And I had observed through many of their friends, through teaching women all over the world, through being with different people, that a lot of people just didn't have a sense of what are some of the gifts, the intrinsic, the inside character and virtue do my children need to have so that they will be served well when they go into the world. And the world is a very difficult place. It is very secular. It is calling out to our children. It is tempting them at every point to give up their faith. And so I wanted to go through, I'm going to be going through a podcast series on 10 gifts of heart, what your child needs to take to heart before leaving home. In other words, what bricks do you lay in the foundation of their hearts and minds and souls so that the rest of their lives, they will be thinking the thoughts that you cherished together in your home. And I have a special guest today, later, a friend of ours who teaches here, has written many books, and has something fun to share with us. But you feel free to order the book because you can underline as you go. You can write notes. You can do whatever you want to do. It's on Amazon. We did it as a print on demand sort of book so that people could have our notes that we took and that we wrote out. And so I'm going to be going through the 10 gifts. I'll be doing 2 chapters per 1 gift. In other words, I will probably do this for 20 sessions, as well as my intro session today. But I am going to bring my friend on later, and I think you will have a lot of fun hearing what we have to talk about. But I love these verses. 2 Corinthians 3:2-3 says, "You are our letter written in our hearts, known and read by all men, being manifested that you are a letter of Christ, cared for by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts." Isn't that beautiful? And I would say this about my children: you are our letter, written in your hearts, written in our hearts, known and read by all men. And so we used to tell our children that they were the book that we were writing for the legacy of our lives, and that people would read their story, the ways that they engaged in life and culture, to see what was there. And so it is messages written on human hearts that will stay with them forever. 2 Corinthians 5:20 says, "Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were making an appeal through us." Isn't that a beautiful picture? Think of yourself. Think of ambassadors. Ambassadors live in all these different countries. I've lived in so many countries where I needed the help of an ambassador, or at least of the office of the ambassador in different places. One time I was in Australia, and all of our passports and our wallets were stolen, and we had to go to the ambassador who fought for us and defended us to the country of Australia so that we could have help when we didn't have any means of getting home. And so an ambassador represents the country from which they came, and I'll be talking about that a little bit more as I read the book later. But our children are ambassadors for Christ. And that's something else that I kept in mind. And I actually had a train ride that I'll tell you about with an ambassador that really had an impact on me. And Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit." And so I'm going to read a little bit. These are the things that Clay and I specifically wrote down. What are traits, manners, character habits, values? What are things beyond normal education that we want to send our children into the world with? As I mentioned before, people have said to me, "How in the world did you raise your children? They must just have been naturally mannerly, or they must have naturally had a good character." And I think, no one does. And I often say I've earned every gray hair. But I have to say that the raising of my children is now one of my favorite, most cherished things I ever did, because I have such a close relationship with them. And in discipling them, I was discipled. I was called to my best self, to excellence, to grow, to confess my sin, so that they would be able to grow. And I think that one of the things that I talk about a lot is a trained heart. A trained heart is a heart that has been trained, instructed, corrected, practiced over and over again amongst the virtues that matter. And a trained heart only comes through instruction and practice. And every parent wants their child to grow up into a vibrant, gracious, competent adult, yet few have a vision for the discipline that it takes in your home, in the moments of cultivating a heart, not just behavior, but to give our children a heart for what they want to grow into as adults. Moralistic rules, don't do that. Do that. That is good. That is bad. And policing their behavior. If you do that, you'll get in trouble. Will not captivate their imagination for a life with God. That is not how Jesus treated Peter or any of the disciples. Instead, he befriended, he encouraged, he modeled, he trained and instructed. So to raise our children with godly character, we have to capture the imagination of their hearts. And I talked about this last week as I was talking about awakening wonder in yourself. And then through that imagination of loving God and knowing him, it pours over into the lives of your children. Your children need to see what you see. They need a vision for their lives. I realized this as I worked to nurture our children early on. And Clay and I focused so much on the heart of our children. When we train them to become skillful at work or taught them how to be gracious and mannerly over and over and over again, challenge them to serve other people, challenge them to take initiative in life. They responded by combining a vision of what they could do with their day-to-day training, who they could become. Through our encouragement, we were preparing them to become influential adults in their lifetimes, confident and gracious with the messages of Christ. Now, I have to tell you that my children haven't gotten to the point where they look back and go, oh my goodness, we had such a training. I mean, they are all grateful for our family. We all love one another. But it's been really interesting to watch Sarah with her 3 children turn around to me and go, oh my goodness, now I really appreciate what it cost you. Because it's when you do it yourself that you really are more aware of it. But excellence of character, when I was pondering all these things, really captivated my attention when, as a young missionary, I was challenged to move to communist Eastern Europe. You know that I moved to Poland. I worked in Romania, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Hungary. And that I was challenged there to draw people to Christ, not just through the Bible, but through winsome relationships and a modeling of a different kind of life. And I accepted the challenge, and part of the preparation was a lot of training on our behalf. But one of the pictures of ministry presented to me as missionaries has stayed with me all of these years. It's that of being an ambassador and having the letter of God written in our hearts. Now, I'm going to tell you a story that many of you have heard before, but I'll tell it again because it's so apropos right here, right now. I was with my dear friend Gwenny, who worked with me as we were the first 2 women to work in Eastern Europe and to live in the country of Poland, in the country of these Eastern European countries, at the beginning of everything. So we were just learners. We were just trying to establish a foundation for other people to follow. But we were on our way from Warsaw back to Vienna on a train, which we went out at least every 6 months because then we were able to refresh and get all of our mail and eat normal food, and because there wasn't a lot of food in our country at that time. And as we were riding on this train, and many of you are familiar with this story, but we were in a train car, where there's 8 seats or 6 seats or whatever. And it was my friend Gwenny and I. It was Gwenny and it was me. And we were in the coach with a young man, a young adult who was dressed very professionally. He had on a gray Oxford, wool coat, wool jacket with a blue Oxford cloth shirt, a tie, and gray flannel pants and polished shoes. In other words, it wasn't your everyday worker. And it looked like he was with an older woman, which I'm assuming was his mom, and it was. But anyway, we rode along for a while. It was a very long trip. And after a while, and he was speaking in Polish to his mother, and after a while he said, "Excuse me, I think you're American. he said, I can hear you speaking English to one another. And so he got up and closed the door very carefully. And for the next while, we shared stories. And we found out that because there were some visionary people in Poland who said, someday Russia will leave our country. Someday, maybe our country will no longer be under the tethers of communism. And so they chose a group of students at 5 years old. And they took these students, I think there are about 10 or 15 of them. They took these children and they gave them mentoring. They gave them the best education they could through tutors. They exposed them to art and music and cultures. They took them to concerts. They taught them manners. They taught them leadership skills. They did all of these things with them. And he said, I am one of the children who was chosen. And he said, right now I am going to a diplomat finishing school in Vienna, because they feel that very soon we will have opportunities to go into the world to represent Poland so that Poland can flourish as a country. And, I've thought about that so many times. It was such a picture to me before I even got married of parenting, that when we take our children aside from the rest of the world and we train them and we expose them to the best that there is and manners and literature and music and art and mathematics and science and cultures and we give them an exceptional training of heart, soul, mind, then they will leave our home and go into the world as ambassadors for Christ. That when people see them, they'll say, oh, they are different. I wonder what's different about them. And so the whole idea of ambassadors became my own imagination when I was raising my own children. And it's an interesting thing as Clay and I look back on it, because of course we made mistakes. Of course, we had to learn, but I'm just going to read to you just a little bit from the book so that you can kind of imagine some of these things for yourself, or at least refresh in them. Manners, loyal love, a trained and strong mind, a sense of God's purpose, spiritual vitality, character, gratitude. All of these themes and more are areas that we very specifically covered in the training of our children. We considered these as basic training for our ambassador children who would go into the world. And this book is about some of the ways that we set about deliberately to instill in our children an understanding also very specifically of their identity in Christ, that they were made to be holy, set apart for His purposes, that they were made by an excellent God with a personality and with skills that only they have, with a fingerprint to leave on eternity that was different than anyone else's fingerprint. And we told them that we needed to prepare them, and we couldn't make them be obedient, but that we wanted to inspire and help them so that they would choose to live into the vision that God would have for their lives. And so this is going to be a podcast series about how we formed them, their faith, their character, their skills, so that they would flourish and stand strong, even in a fallen world, as mature adults and vibrant souls. You know, I made a lot of mistakes in my younger adult life, and I've made a lot of mistakes in my adult life, but I have tried to remember that in Proverbs it says the beginning of wisdom is to acquire wisdom, and with all of your acquiring, get understanding. And so we wanted, if possible, to help our children acquire wisdom. You've heard me refer to their hearts and souls and minds as the treasure chest. We pictured that whole area as a treasure chest of their lives, and we sought to invest in their treasure chest, to put treasure there that they would draw from the rest of their lives. Memorizing scripture, memorizing the 24 family ways, practicing being a servant, practicing hospitality, learning to discuss and discourse great ideas. And so we thought that even as colleges want to know what your academic scores are, that we wanted to have our children have heart, soul, mind, strength scores, that we wanted to cover things to prepare them to become the ambassadors in their lifetime. Now, this book and this podcast series isn't meant to be a comprehensive plan or a theology for giving your children a heart for God. There's nothing that is totally comprehensive. God gives us a lot of freedom and grace with the personalities of our children, with our story, with the cultures in which we live. And there's no list of rules. There's no list of rules. I keep saying that says if you do these 10 things, everything will follow. But we do have wisdom and biblical principles that we were able to focus upon. So this is kind of what I would say is a compact training guide for future ambassadors emerging from your home. These are things that your high schoolers need to know. Your junior hires need to have deep in their conscious, in their psyche, before they move into the world. And so I want you to think as we go into my next segment, what is the story that I'm writing on my children's heart? And I hope that today you will be encouraged by my friend Michael Ward, Dr. Michael Ward, who is he has been in our bubble. That means that we were allowed to have him in our home and us in his home. So we bubbled every Thursday night for the past couple of years. And he has just released another wonderful book. And so I asked him if I could share about it in light of these thoughts today. So I'll be welcoming him in my next segment. So my friends, I've told you that I'm going to have a very special guest on today, a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Michael Ward. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Sally. Please don't call me Doctor. Michael. In fact, my nickname, as you know well, is Spud. Mm-hmm. But I suppose we better be a bit more formal than that today.
I know. So we do call him Spud, but I didn't know if you'd allow that to be on our show today. But anyway, we have been friends for years. We all bubbled together and had lots of fun. And he just recently, he is an expert on C.S. Lewis. He's given much of his life to writing books, lecturing, and unloading or taking out all of the secrets that we can find in the, I don't know, how would you describe it? Mysteries of C.S. Lewis's writing?
The hidden depths of the Narnia Chronicles, most notably. That's my main work. My book, Planet Narnia, was all about that. And now I've written this new book called After Humanity, which is a guide to Lewis's The Abolition of Man.
Well, both titles are just amazing. So tell us, we're going to be talking about that today in light of the fact that I just did an introduction on the necessity of virtue and values and ideals and manners being something that is trained. It doesn't just happen naturally. So which one do you want to go to first? I would say, what does it mean after humanity? It sounds like a science fiction movie.
Yeah, well, After Humanity, I suppose, is a sort of reflection of Lewis's own title, The Abolition of Man. Mm-hmm. And The Abolition of Man is a short little book that Lewis wrote about value, about whether value is objective or not. You know, goodness, mm-hmm. truth, beauty, those values, do they really exist out there in the world? Or are they just projections? Are they just subjective things that we dream up on our own? Are they merely personal and subjective, or do they actually exist? And Lewis argues in The Abolition of Man that they really do exist. Goodness, truth, and beauty, these objective values, they are indeed realities that we can encounter and discover and learn about and, adjust ourselves to. But if we don't do that, if we begin to think that we make everything up on our own, well, then we're making ourselves less than human. Mm-hmm. We're bringing about our own abolition, mm-hmm. the abolition of man, or in my guide, After Humanity. That's where it will lead to if we go down the path of subjectivism.
Mm-hmm. So the abolition of man is getting rid of man, of course. I remember when I first read it, the thing that obviously stuck out to me too was when he said men without chests. So what does that mean? He says, we make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor. We are shocked to find traitors in our midst. So what does he mean? What do you think he meant when he described men without chests?
Well, he has this idea of the human person in three parts: the head, the belly, and the chest. This is just a kind of a philosophical model of the human person. And in the head, we have thoughts and reasons. That's our logical department for thinking. In the belly, we have sensations and passions and emotions and appetites. And in the chest, if we're a fully, properly formed human being, we have the liaison officer between reason and emotion. Mm-hmm. And it's that liaison officer, that middle department, that chest, which connects our logic and our love, you might say, our thoughts and our feelings, so that our feelings aren't just random or uncontrolled, and neither are our thoughts and our reasons cold and dry, but rather the two connect so that we can be intelligently emotional, but also emotionally intelligent. And it's the role of the chest to put the head and the belly in touch with each other. But if we don't try to find that holistic unity in the chest, then we're going to make ourselves to be men without chests, people without chests, and that's a major step on the path to destroying our humanity, because we'll either evaporate upwards into false spirituality. The brain, the mind is an intellectual, spiritual aspect of us that we share with the angels. But we're not just angels, because we're also embodied creatures. We have bodies and senses which matter. But if we overemphasize the belly, then we'll devolve downwards into being no different from the animals. So what do we want to be? Do we want to be angels? Do we want to be animals? Well, we should want to be neither. We should want to be human beings. We should be anthropological. That's what anthropology is all about, being a true human being. So combine the belly and the brain in the human breast, and you have a human being.
Mm-hmm. And so would you say, give us a down-to-earth description of a chest? Is that virtue? Is it virtue that determines how you react with your mind and your belly? In other words, what guides the thinking so that we might be fully human in the way that God designed us?
Yeah, I think the chest can be described as the seat of virtue, the organ of virtue, because, I mean, what does virtue mean? Etymologically, the word virtue comes from vir, which means man. Mm-hmm. Think of virility. A virile man is a very manly man. Mm-hmm. And of course, that means it covers men and women. To be virtuous is to be truly human. Mm-hmm. And as I've just been explaining, Lewis sees that coming about through the integration of our thoughts and our feelings, so that our feelings are stabilized and our sentiments are made just and civilized and regularized, so that we become reliable people. We're not just, blown about by every wind of passion.
Mm-hmm. So I was just talking before you got here about how, in my opinion, a lot of this needs to be taught, trained, instructed, modeled, that virtue doesn't come from nowhere. Nothing rarely comes from nowhere. So what would you say the role is for parents, for teachers, for educators? How do we cultivate this? How do we develop people with chests?
Yeah, well, the subtitle of Lewis's book, The Abolition of Man, is about education. He's very interested in the forming of young minds. He doesn't talk very explicitly about parenting, but of course, everything he says about education is easily transferable into the home, into the domestic classroom, as it were, as parents instruct their offspring in these matters. So it's all very, relevant to the bringing up of children either in school or in the home. And much of what he's talking about is this idea of stabilizing ourselves. What's that old image of Martin Luther about the drunk man who falls off the horse on the left side and then he gets back on the horse and falls off the horse on the right side? You lurch from one extreme to the other unless you have a well-developed chest. You can be either excessively cerebral, all brain and no feeling, or you can be excessively sensual, all belly and no fact. We need facts and feelings. We need thoughts and emotions. So in the raising up of children, one of the main ways in which, of course, parents teach their children is simply through example. And mothers and fathers, teachers, pastors, priests, we all need to model for the younger generation a well-integrated chest, because the young people will look at us and they'll learn far more from how they see us behave than anything we're likely to say to them. So, when it comes to regularity, a lot of the chest depends upon regularizing. There are lots of 1,000 little ways in which children can be taught to be regular.
I think it's an organic sort of a practice. It's the morning, noon, and night. It's Deuteronomy 6 and 7, where it talks about you train them in the morning, you train them at night, you train them before they go to bed. In other words, it's passing on the words, the example, the insight, and that it becomes a whole part of the shaping of their soul or chest.
Yeah. So, and it's important to distinguish between regularity and regimentation, because raising a well-balanced child is not it's not like drilling an officer in the army. It's got to be more humane than that, more balanced, more relaxed than that, but more
relational.
But regularity is part of relationship, because you need to know that people are reliable, and part of reliability is regularity. So tiny little things like going to bed roughly the same time, getting up in the morning roughly the same time, having the meals of the day roughly the same time, so that life becomes dependable and you can plan and you can have reasonable expectations about where other people are going to be and what they're going to be doing. Kissing your child goodnight. For instance, C.S. Lewis is interesting in this regard. He says that one of the reasons why a parent kisses their child good night is not just so much that they can express love for their child, but so that they may love the child.
It's a both and, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because
it's in the doing of it, it becomes
exactly.
more true.
It's a virtuous circle that you become what you do, and these little rituals help us to love one another. Because they provide a framework, a
stability,
kind of,
from the regularity of
exactly.
it. Yeah. Okay, well, I've got so much more to ask you, but I did want to stop here for a second and tell everyone that you are an actor. The only reason I mention this is because one of my favorite parts of After Humanity is that there are incredibly beautiful photographs. I love when I admire someone, I want to go back and read their story and look at their pictures and know where they lived and what's going on. And so this book is full of wonderful photographs that you gleaned. I don't know how you found them. Tell us about that. But then I do want to remind people that there was recently a movie that came out and you were in the movie. So anyway, tell us how in the world did you find such interesting and really well-documented photographs of Lewis that I haven't seen in other places?
Yeah, well, I like what Alice in Wonderland says. What is the use of a book without pictures?
Oh, here. I agree with that.
I'm quite a visual learner as well as a verbal learner, and I think a well-chosen picture and a well-captioned picture can teach a lot. When you go into a bookshop or a library, if the book has pictures in the middle, in a photo gallery, you always go to that first, don't you, and flick through the pictures. So I thought that this book by Lewis, The Abolition of Man, which is in some ways quite philosophical, would benefit a great deal from showing some of the people he talks about, some of the places that are relevant to the production of this book, some of the documents about it as well, like his own original blurb for the book, which has never been published before. That's in my guide. But the pictures I'm most interested in, and I think which you're sort of drawing our attention to, are those of Lewis as a young man in the British Army, because those pictures haven't been published much at all.
No, I had never seen.
No, in fact, there is only one photograph of Lewis in uniform as a young officer cadet. And so that's in this book for a reason we'll come on to. But as well as Lewis in uniform, there's his friend Paddy Moore in uniform. And Lewis and Moore became friends in the British Army during the First World War. And they promised each other that if one of them was to be killed, that the surviving one would look after the dead man's family. And alas, Paddy Moore was killed. And Lewis kept his promise and looked after Paddy's mother and sister for many decades thereafter. Now, this is an example of virtue, of promise-keeping.
Oh, no kidding. I mean, he had no idea, as often we don't, when we make these idealistic commitments, what it will cost us.
No,
and I don't know that all of my, some of my audience are new to Lewis. Some have read every single thing that they can ever imagine. But can you just quickly tell what it cost him? Or it just kind of, they promised one another what they would do, and then just tell a little tiny bit about it. It's such a great story.
Well, so Paddy is killed, alas, in 1918, and Lewis, because Paddy's father had left the family, they needed the support of a man. There was the mother and the sister, and Lewis became a sort of surrogate son to Jane Moore, Paddy's mother, and a kind of surrogate brother to his sister Maureen, and lived with them for the next several decades.
I know, decades. We're talking,
yes.
Now, and my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong here, Keble College, which is near us, where they went through their basic training, they weren't long-term friends before that. They became friends in basic training and in the war.
That's right.
So they make this pledge to one another when they didn't even know one another as well as you might if you'd known somebody in your whole life. And then decades of him taking care of these two people financially, in the home, everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Their friendship, Lewis and Paddy's friendship, was quite brief. They only happened to become friends, really, because of the alphabetical arrangement of the billet.
I forgot that.
Lewis and Moore, L and M, just happened to be put in the same room together, and that's how they got connected. They discovered that they had an Irish background in common, and that, I think, helped draw them together. But yeah, it was only a matter of months that they knew each other,
right.
And this brief relationship affected the entire course of the rest of C.S. Lewis's life.
But as you're talking about a man with a chest, because he had a sense of his duty and his virtue and his, the kind of the call to this, that's why he would never have thought not to take care of the promise he made to this man, which I think a lot of people give up their word today. There's so many things I would like to say, but first of all, before we forget it, what is the name of the movie that just came out? Because I loved seeing it, because it gave a whole new aspect of the life of C.S. Lewis. So tell us about that.
Yeah, well, the film is called The Most Reluctant Convert, and it's about C.S. Lewis's path to faith. As a young man, he fell away from his childhood Christianity. He'd been raised as a Christian, but then in his teens turned his back on it. And by a long, slow process in his 20s and very early 30s, he came back to Christian belief. And this movie tells that story. And I have a small part in it as the vicar of Lewis's parish here in Oxford. Holy Trinity Headington Quarry is the parish where Lewis began to worship after he became a Christian, and indeed it's the place where his body is buried in the churchyard there. And so I was asked to play the role of the local vicar, and I'm in 2 scenes, and I even have lines, and it was great fun. And
all of us are going, look, there's Spud! He did a great job, but he's also been in other movies. We won't talk about that right now.
No. But it's going back to the earlier point about Lewis's wartime experience with Paddy. There are scenes set in the First World War, and all that is very relevant to the abolition of man, because Lewis argues that the real test of objective value is when we have to suffer for doing the right thing. And the example he uses is death for a good cause, death for one's country. And he, C.S. Lewis, knew what he was talking about when he used that example. It wasn't just some abstract ideal. He himself had very nearly died for his country. He'd been severely wounded in battle, and he'd seen men die, and his friend Paddy had been killed. So he knew what he was talking about, and he knew that, death in battle was not at all pleasant. There was nothing nice or sweet or fitting about it for the person concerned, and yet there's this long tradition of the idea of noble patriotic death being sweet and fitting. And Lewis cites the old Latin tag, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. It's sweet and seemly to die for one's country. But of course, it's not sweet and seemly for the person doing the dying, at least not in their immediate experience. Nonetheless, it is something that is virtuous and honourable. So that point, that brings home to us that doing the right thing and being happy are not identical. Like keeping his promise to Paddy to look after his mother and sister. That involved Lewis in a lot of difficulty and trial.
And they weren't necessarily angels, were they?
Not at all. And yet, if you've made the promise, you need to keep the promise.
As best as you can, with as good of an attitude. I think that oftentimes when we talk to parents, and as I look back in my own life, I think sometimes parents are tempted to retrieve their children from all difficulty, to try to make every moment of their lives happy, which of course is impossible. But I think even as I ponder this, what prepares someone to be brave and loyal and courageous and so on and so forth, I think that Clay and I learned early that when difficulties come, when terrible things happen, you walk with your children through it. You love them through it. You hold them through it. You don't try to remove them from difficulty, because it's those very difficulties that train them bit by bit to learn how they can be steadfast or courageous or sacrificial when they encounter life by themselves.
Absolutely. 1,000 times yea. I was reading in my Bible Quiet Time this morning the passage from the letter to the Romans where St. Paul says, we rejoice in our sufferings. And I was thinking,
that's not going to preach these days.
Why do you rejoice in your sufferings, Paul? And he goes on and says, because suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint. But if everything is cotton wool and candy floss, how are you ever going to produce endurance and character? You'll just fold at the first sign of problems and difficulties, and you'll never steel yourself. You'll never put on any moral muscle, any virtuous character. And the only way that can come about is, alas, through difficulty and pain and problems.
Well, I love that, because reading The Abolition of Man in your book, actually, and looking at the pictures, I just loved it, kind of stirred up in me all the things I believe. We have to be reminded, don't we? Okay, so one more thing that I loved, and you don't know this either, the picture that you have here.
Oh, yeah.
What inspired the picture of the front of the book with the man standing in front of the waterfall? Because Morricone is one of my favorite people, and I used him in one of my books.
Oh, yeah.
So I want you to tell them who Morricone is and why you picked that picture.
Yeah, so the front cover of After Humanity is a spectacular waterfall. It's in Indonesia. It's a real-life waterfall with a man standing in front of it. Spectacular. And I chose it because The Abolition of Man opens with Lewis discussing an occasion when the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge was visiting a big waterfall in the Lake District here in England, and he got into conversation with a fellow tourist, and the tourist wanted to describe the waterfall as pretty, but Coleridge said, no, that's not merely a pretty waterfall, that's a sublime waterfall. And Lewis uses this as his gateway, his springboard into discussing whether value is objective. Is there such a thing as real beauty out in the world that we can come closer to in our descriptions, or do we just make it all up? Is beauty entirely in the eye of the beholder? Well, there may be a personal element of taste in our perceptions of the world. But Lewis's whole argument is that beauty, goodness, truth, these are objective values, and that, yeah, we can debate about what's the best term to use for them, but only if they really exist outside ourselves is there any point in debating. So that's why I went for the idea of the image of the waterfall on the front cover. Mm-hmm. And then, in connection with Ennio Morricone, the great late Italian film composer, I decided to dedicate my book, After Humanity, to Morricone. Not because I ever met him, alas, but because he died while I was putting the finishing touches to After Humanity. And so he was in the news a lot. And I went back and listened to a lot of his best soundtracks. And probably his greatest piece of music was the soundtrack to the film The Mission, which, of course...
One of my favorite pieces.
Yeah, it's fantastic music. But The Mission, of course, is a film about a mission in South America, and the Iguazu Falls, that great waterfall. And the film opens with a man on a cross disappearing over the edge of this waterfall. Now, that seemed to me to be relevant, not only to the idea of waterfalls, but to this very topic we were just discussing about suffering for a good cause. Because, of course, at the heart of our faith is a man on a cross who sets his face like flint and endures the cross, despising its shame for the hope that is set before him. There in Jesus' own example, we got a prime example of what I was just quoting from the letter to the Romans.
Jesus was a man with a chest.
He was, yeah. And he suffered, but he endured, and it produced character for the hope that was set before him.
That's beautiful. I mean, it's so interesting because as I was reviewing it and reading it a couple of months ago, it was tied together so beautifully. And I love the fact that you have this excerpt from the book. You have the Abolition of Man, as a separate piece that people can read that really discusses a lot of what you just told me about. And you'll have to listen to Ennio Morricone when he does this gorgeous piece of music while you're reading the book. I think it's essential.
Yeah. And of course, Lewis's own book, The Abolition of Man, ends with Jesus' own words from John's Gospel. And I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. So there again, you've got the idea of the objective nature of value requiring us sometimes, not all the time, of course, but sometimes to suffer for the right. Right is not might. But if we say that we just make up value, then we're saying that it's all a question of power and who gets to call the shots. If I say something is right, it's right. And who are you to say otherwise? But if value is objective, then we can at least discuss it and debate it. But we may have to suffer for it.
But also give our children a clear sense of what is value, what is virtue. Because in this world that competes for their attention, they need to have these foundations of vocabulary of words that actually will hold them in the times when they need to make decisions to become people with chests.
Yeah. And so I think going back to the idea of how to raise children, one of the things that parents and teachers must do is model endurance and show that just because something's difficult, painful, may even cause suffering, doesn't make it wrong. On the contrary, that's the evidence that you believe in the objectivity of value, if you're willing to suffer for the right. And that's such a absolutely crucial example to set for young children, so that they don't get into the idea that they're thinking, well, anything I say goes because I say it, and thereby power becomes the only criterion of value. Might becomes right in that scenario. And that's absolutely disastrous.
But I think, too, that there's a part, at least in our lives, as we were working with our children, that to really imagine with vision becoming a hero in your own lifetime, in the sense of telling these great stories and all of our children read it, The Abolition of Man, and they all would puff out their chests and say, "I will be a person with a chest." But it's kind of the stories, the vocabulary, the training, the modeling, and the shaping is something powerful that we can give to the next generation by attending to it, by knowing it, by modeling it. And so that's why I love this. I love that you put this book into print. It's a beautiful book. And I would like for you to tell people they can order it anywhere. However, if they order it from the publisher Word on Fire, they are able to get The Abolition of Man separately. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So the publisher of my book, After Humanity, is Word on Fire Academic, to give it the imprint's name. And if you go to wordonfire.org/humanity, you can order my book, The Guide, and in getting my book, you get a free copy of The Abolition of Man, a tie-in edition with a matching cover, specially designed by C.S. Lewis's publishers, so that you get 2 books for the price of 1. So go to wordonfire.org/humanity and get my book, and you'll get Lewis's book thrown in. But if you go through Amazon or some other publisher, through some other bookseller, you won't necessarily you won't get the free copy. So do
wonderful.
It that way. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here. This was a great discussion.
It was. Thank you.
We must continue it over our Thursday meals.
Indeed.
Do you see what I get to do every week, having these great, wonderful friends? All right, my friends, I am so grateful that you're with us today, and I hope that this makes sense to you about how the 10 Gifts of Heart tie in with these wonderful books, After Humanity and The Abolition of Man. So thank you for being with me.
Thanks, Sally, as ever.
It's
Till
really
next time.
fun. Until next time. And we will try to do something great again maybe soon.
Amen.
Okay. Bye-bye, people. Bye-bye, my friends.
Bye-bye.
So, my friends, I hope that you have really enjoyed today. I always love having my friends from around here on the podcast, but I just want to pray for you. And you can get a copy of his book and of my book, 10 Gifts. And I hope that 10 Gifts of Heart, and I hope that both will encourage you. Anyway, let me pray for us. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for these brave and strong people in my audience who do care so much about wanting to be the dependable people with chests, people with virtue. And I pray that you might use this podcast today to encourage them. Lord, give them friends, books, ideas, cups of tea, whatever they need to keep them going along the way, to help them to know that it matters, that they are faithful. And thank you, Lord, for just all the pleasures that you've given me in my life to keep me going. Even my bed that I look so forward to every night, even my squishy pillows, even the sun that has come out lately, finally in Oxford, and the parks I get to walk in. Help us, Lord, to fill ourselves up that we might become a resource of steadfastness and courage for other people. In Jesus' name, amen. Goodbye. I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope you've enjoyed our time together today and that you'll join me next week. Be sure to look for more inspiration on my blog at sallyclarkson.com. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.